Now, how are you handling the pandemic? Is it bad in Wales? I don't know what.
That's
I'm
pretty okay with it. Like, I'm not, it sucks.
Yeah, it really does.
Welcome to OTR, Over the Rainbow, Achieving Mental Health for Real. This podcast offers hope to many people who needlessly suffer from mental health issues. Your host, Bob Adelman, brings you information on how you can recover from any mental health issue and achieve a happier life. If you want to know more, please check out his trailer. Bob's notes on today's show follows.
Welcome to part 2 of Real Best of OTR, Achieving Mental Health for Real. Today we cover the rest of 2020 and start episodes from 2021. First up is my 2-part interview with Marilyn Moses. Here is Bob's original introduction.
We have Marilyn Moses. She is an entrepreneur and a motivational speaker. She has a company called Alter Ego Global, and she took some valuable time out to talk to me, and we wound up talking for an hour and a half.
When it comes to mental illness, at some point in our lives, we have a forgetting of who we are, and it can be something small or it can be something really big. And because we've all experienced some kind of a trauma or a belief or something that has happened in our life, and those beliefs, they shape us and they hinder us moving forward in our lives. And so the more we have this conversation around mental health, the more we're able to come into a self-awareness and create a life where we can prosper rather than constantly being on this roller coaster ride of suffering and highs and lows. And so this is just one of my favorite topics.
Tried to get my wife help. She was riddled with anxiety, and she refused to believe anything was wrong with her. So that's the problem. That's the stigma. People don't want to believe it. They'd rather drink and take drugs because that's okay. But God forbid you go and examine yourself, and maybe you need a little medicine or counseling. But a lot of people forgo that and they just go into acceptable, drinking is acceptable, drugs are acceptable. But when you start talking about Prozac and Paxil and, all the different drugs that there are, they don't want to even think about it or do anything about it. So it's really a tragedy.
It absolutely is. And I have to say, there was a point in my life, I remember when my daughter was complaining about anxiety, and I didn't quite get it. And I've always been that person who was anti-medications. And so it's well, there's other things that you could do. And she really pushing for the medication. And I don't think it was until just recently, the episode that I went through with my ex, where I realized sometimes those medications are just really, really needed, because your life does, even though he is in such a place of, in his words, heaven, the outside life is blowing up in your face. And so to use these medications to at least get the edge off so you can start to see things in a more, in more of reality. That was the first time I actually realized how powerful and needed the medications are. I don't know if you watched the movie, the most recent Joker movie.
No, I have not.
It was basically on the Joker, how he was bullied and this, and then ended up becoming this, the Joker ended up becoming this mass murderer. And that's what we think mental illness is. And we also think when you see these commercials for medications come up, you see this, why is mommy so sad? Why is this? You're only seeing these one little snapshots of what mental illness is. And so then it's easy for us to divide ourselves and separate ourselves from what mental illness actually is, because we're thinking that it's like, oh, these people are bad. These are the people who are homeless on the streets. These are the people who are completely manic. But it's not that at all. And it's not what they show on TV or anything like that. And I think one of the biggest reasons is why we don't talk about mental illness is because if we start talking about it, we all have to take personal responsibility and accountability for it. Because like you said,
yes.
Mental illness affects every single family, because like the behaviors just get passed on from generation after generation after generation, and we call these things normal.
We have to break the cycle where you don't treat your children like you were treated, and educate them on any kind of mental illness. It just takes the life out of you. It takes the love out of you. The very things you need to help yourself with mental illness, it takes from you. So, that spirit of, just do it. You can do it. Mental illness takes that from you. And it's a monster. And I always say it's pandemic. Speaking of pandemic.
Absolutely.
I say that it's all over the world. And it's kind of the problem with the world. It's kind of what, why we don't live in a paradise or live up to our capabilities, because we're all so kind of messed up. I mean, even the quote unquote normal people, if you look into their lives, you can find something that's bizarre almost all the time. They might not suffer as much as a person like myself, but they're suffering. They're what's called not awake. They're living, their life on automatic pilot, and that in itself is kind of insane if you think about it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, all these high executives, the person that I worked for last, they're all trying to meet a goal that's not there. When you get to the end of the rainbow, it's nothing. That's where I get over the rainbow from. If you go and finally reach your goal, once you get there, you say, well, wait a minute, is that all there is? And I think that happens a lot. And we crawl on each other to get to that goal. And even when we reach it, we're like, wait a minute, this isn't as good as I thought it would be. So I think people are focused in the wrong direction to begin with. They're more focused on money and being rich, but you can't take the money into your coffin. I mean, you could put it in your coffin.
Yeah. But
money is almost worthless. I'm going from retirement. I'm going to be making a fraction of what I have been making as an IT person. But you know what? I don't care. Just to get out of that bureaucracy and that toxic, this toxic environment where people can't even be themselves, or else they're brought up on charges of, saying the wrong thing or not being politically correct.
And this is what I've devoted my life to, is there's got to be and the word is not balance, the word is marriage, a marriage between psychology and spirituality, and not spirituality in the form of like whatever you think it is. Spirituality to me is a true connection to yourself, your true expression of yourself, and who you are, your truth. And I'm sitting here, we're traveling the world, we're posting our travels over the years and things like that, and it looks like we're having a great life. But I can post like us swimming with the whale sharks in the Philippines and how much fun we're having and getting massages on the beach, but I can't post my doubts. I can't post my insecurity. I can't post my confusion over the behaviors. I can't post all those little things that add up. So you're right. Social media only shows this one side of the story, and then you've got people who share like the people who do put their whole life story on Facebook. Oh my God, this, and they're like, oh, everybody's exhausted by them. They're such victims, and it's like, but there's nothing in between. It's like black or white, and social media is so dangerous that because it perpetuates mental health pandemic. It absolutely perpetuates it.
And it groups people, to fight against each other. My philosophy on life is that God equals truth equals love. I think they're all equal. I think the closer you get to truth, the closer you get to God, and the closer you get to love.
Absolutely.
And that's my belief. And I'm sticking to it. Now, I'm retired. I'll feel a lot better under the pressure of work. But the demon of mental illness and depression, I don't think I'll ever be able to get rid of that. I have to manage it. I have to live with it. And I have to reconcile to it. And part of what I'm doing this show for is to help in that area.
Absolutely.
It's partly for me. I'm being selfish.
That's the thing. It is the more we share our stories, the more we speak up, the more we heal ourselves. I wrote a book last year and about a lot of the abuse that I had gone through in my life. I thought I was writing this book for others, and it wasn't. The book was for myself. And that is why it's so important to, break the silence. The more we share our stories, the more we heal ourselves.
We have not learned as a species how to parent our children. We just don't know. I mean, up to now, I don't think we've really tried. We just used our children for different chores on the farm or something. But did anyone, ever try to get a resolution to that? I mean, it's just a terrible thing, child abuse, and it goes on all the time, and it causes so much pain as an adult to everyone. In one way or another. And if it doesn't stop, we're not going to last. I mean, the Cobra virus might be the end of us because we don't know how to parent our own children. We think hitting them is a good idea. Or in the opposite direction, not giving them any discipline. Oh, I'm going to be the happy mom, the cool mom.
Yeah.
And I won't discipline anybody at all. Discipline and punishment is two different things. You don't punish children. You discipline them. And they only learn by one thing, and one thing only, what you do. You can say to your blue in the face, smoking is bad, smoking is bad, smoking is bad. But if you're smoking, they're going to smoke.
Yeah.
If you're doing anything, they're going to do it. If you show love to them, they're going to show love to other people. And the healing has to start inside yourself. And you can marry anybody you want. They're not going to be the panacea that makes you happy. You have to get it first, and then you can enjoy, a loving relationship afterwards. But if you don't have it first, if you don't love yourself, your marriage or your relationship is going to be a rocky one.
Yeah.
The people that love themselves to an extent have the best marriages, I believe.
Oh,
And,
absolutely. Absolutely.
and there's so many people that don't love themselves. They try to hang on to somebody, and it will end in disaster. It always will. Karate, I love karate. I took it and I sucked, basically. And that guy, my sensei or whatever you call him, he would say, man, that guy just keeps coming back. He can't do it. He keeps coming back. It took me 5 years to do a 3-year black belt course.
Mm.
But he admired me because I just came back. It's like you're supposed to be able to jump over 8 people. I jumped over 1 if I was lucky. I loved it, and I didn't give up on it. And I'm not going to give up on this broadcast. I mean, like I said, as long as I live, I'm going to be on the air preaching this to as many people as I could possibly get in every way.
Absolutely. It's so beautiful.
To me, right now I'm in spring training. I don't have, the audience that I would like to have. But it's spring training. I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
The artist I was talking about, he said he used to suck himself, but he learned and he didn't quit.
Exactly.
He had that resilience not to quit. And I think everyone should learn from that and be able to start over.
Next is an amazing episode called All Is Well. I was introduced to Yuri Ko. I was supposed to interview him. Instead, he interviewed me. Yuri is a very dynamic person with a lot of spiritual and practical methods for achieving mental health, whether you take medicine or not. Here is Yuri Ko.
The source was my trying to prove myself to me, my trying to prove that only winning is worthwhile, that I will be worthwhile, that I will be, approved and accepted, and that I will be good enough. Yeah. Because like every person, we go through different things in our childhood, and different things affect us differently, and with no explanations. With, in the 80s or in the 70s or the 60s, so 50, 60, 40 years ago, there was not this consciousness, awareness available so much or so present in the media itself and in the internet. There was no internet back then. So we didn't know how to handle all these emotional, pressures, emotional things. And my mother walked away when I was 3 years of age. She said, I'm leaving you, everybody. She came back 30 minutes later or 1 hour later, but it stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
I need to be good boy because my mother will leave me. You know what that means.
Right. Abandonment issues, yes.
Yeah, so it's nothing. I didn't have a big trauma in my life. She came back an hour later, I think, or even earlier. I was never beaten by my parents or anything. But these sort of stuff stay put and stay somewhere. And they influenced my performance in life, and they influenced my behavior in life, and how I dealt with it was anger. I wanted to force the result. Because if I didn't have a result, it meant I'm not good enough. Yeah. And I will not be accepted. I will be abandoned. I will have no love or whatever.
Right.
So I was always in that circle.
I was going to ask you, do you have any history of mental illness in your family at all? Or
I'm happy that you asked this, because we all live in a mental asylum. We are all crazy. We are all completely crazy and nuts. So no, we were not diagnosed, but my grandparent, he was an alcoholic. My father loved to drink, not only socially, but he loved to drink. He wasn't an alcoholic anyway, but those kind of things. My mother was angry, was impatient in a way. My sister is, a wreck sometimes, or was. I was under pressure. We never went to psychology or to a psychotherapist or get a diagnosis. But as I said, we all live in a mental asylum. And sometimes I think that people that are closed in these mental asylums are sane. to understand that we need to be connected to nature. Need is such a crazy term, but we can allow the process to happen, the patience. So this is the boredom, being in the boredom desert, like all the saints, or we can touch religious figures like Jesus or somebody else, but they all went through, or Buddha, they all went through some 40 days of solitude, of, dark room or something. And this is boring, to be with yourself, because we are afraid to confront ourselves.
Very true.
We do not know how to allow the mind, the thoughts, and because we do not have all of the explanations. And this is where I needed to learn. And I'm happy for my insanity. I am happy for my mental illness, because it brought me, I'm happy for my ego. I accept because my ego brought me to a place that I have learned a lot and I've practiced a lot. If you understand, I'm not resisting. You know how it's called and explained. If you resist, it will only grow. So I accepted my insanity in a way. A couple of times I needed to confront and accept myself, all of it, if you understand. Yeah. So this is the main thing. I would not go into the medicine if it's right or wrong, or if it's the Western medicine or the Chinese medicine or anything. It needs to be coherent, and it will be more and more applicable together in the symbiosis, in harmony. This Western and Eastern medicine, because it's not just Western, and of course it's not just the Eastern medicine and approach that it's needed.
I like Queen. They're an old rock group.
Okay,
yeah.
Queen.
So not rock, I guess you could say.
It's not a trick question. It's just to use it in explanation. Then on what you don't like to listen, what you turn off the music immediately. Or you change
country music.
Country music. Okay. So when you listen to radio and you hear the country music, I believe that you immediately put it on a mute or you change the station. Is that so?
Correct.
So I'm sad, not sad. How to put it in this way? I have to say it, Bob. It's that simple. It's very hard, but it's that simple. So when you are eagerly stubborn, or when you are afraid of something, change the station.
Right.
It's that simple. When you are depressed, change the station. I know.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I know. I told you it's hard. It's that simple, but it's so hard. Everything will resist, but I understand this resistance, and I need to confront it, and I can confront it, and it's good that I confront it, because this resistance is in a way trying to prevent me to be happy and say, this resistance, this devil on one part of my shoulder sitting is saying, now if you will be happy, everything will be worse. Of course, this devil, this resistance wants us that we stick with him, with them. But we say, no. Stop now. If I'm happy, I'm happy. And that doesn't mean anything that something bad or something not bad will happen, or that something doesn't need to or does or will happen. I'm just happy. That's it. And of course, everything will resist in me and will have this resistance. And I understand this. So I allow it. I am on the level C. I'm not anyway in the level A to B. I will send you one explanation that I have, this slide, and I can present it to you, and you can add it as a photo of a wisdom scale level. So I am on a higher level of unity, of love, of joy, and not anymore entrapped in this A to B ping pong of my ego, not anymore entrapped that something good, something bad needs to or will happen because of something. I just live.
Dr. Allyson Boodram gave her life from the 9/11/2001 tragedy 21 years later of lung cancer. She is another victim of the disaster. I like to dedicate this real series to Allyson Boodram. Rest in peace, Allyson.
There is definitely a stigma still associated with mental health. We are very good as a society to promote our physical well-being, and a lot of Western medicine, which is great and needed. But I think that we don't spend enough time exploring our mental and emotional intelligence. And so we have very basic or childlike abilities and coping mechanisms. And I think as we get older, these things, we sort of outgrow those mechanisms. And so in my own life, I volunteered at 9/11 as a med student because I had taken an oath. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to help people, and that's what we should do. So I spent the first 5 days on the cleanup site, and we didn't have anything in the first 48 hours. But, you know, when you're in your 20s, you never really think about the consequences of your actions, or, you know, are developmentally we're appropriate to think that we know it all, but we're just starting our adulthood. So fast forward to 2018, August, I got diagnosed unexpectedly with metastatic stage 4 lung cancer. And the last almost 2 years, survivor, have not been easy. And I think it really has given me personally a better insight into what it means when we talk about mental and emotional well-being. And it's not a separate part of the body. It's not something that's, you know, heebie-jeebie, whatever. It's really important. And I don't think that we address it as much as we should at a much younger age, you know. But hopefully as we move forward, we can only hope that, you know, future generations would do that. We've seen so much focus on mindfulness and meditation and, you know, sort of all these other things. And I think those are good things, but they're not very easy to be very good at doing it. So if you can do it well, you know, and find that sort of Zen or absolute relaxation, I think there is benefit. But I still think that there's, you know, not a quick fix for everything. And I think what we should be working on is insight into ourselves and facing our own demons.
I was just wondering, do you consider your cancer a byproduct of 9/11?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. We do. So
okay.
I have an EGFR mutation, so it just makes me more, you know, sensitive, I guess, to developing lung cancer, and it's common in Asians. So I fall in the Asian subgroup for my ethnicity.
Okay.
So I'm considered a 9/11 victim.
Yeah.
And yeah, so but I would do it the same way. I mean, you know, it was one of the greatest things I've ever had an opportunity to be part of. I never speak about it really because I felt like it was not my story to tell. In my own experience, just that divide, you know, when I was on site at Ground Zero, there were tens of thousands of people just, you know, like cheering you on. And I was in my 20s and the FBI is driving you from one place to the other. And you're like, what is happening? You know? And wow. It was a great feeling. And I have a sister that's a musician. And I remember thinking this is what it must feel like for her. She had, you know, some semi-fame. And so I was like, this is what it feels like to be like a superstar, you know? And yeah, you're young and you're like, wow, I'm really doing something important and this is great. And then you walk off and then you're just back in the city and people are thinking you're a terrorist. So, you know, it was hard, but did I have anybody to talk to about that? No, because in medicine, you just suck it up and move on, right? Because we have a bunch of physician burnout right now, and I'm burnt out. I actually did my own, what we call like a burnout inventory assessment that's used a lot in the research. It's called the Maslach burnout inventory. And I was like, you know what, I'll pay $20 and just do my own.
And burnout is a mental illness if you think about it, I think.
Right. Yeah. And so this Christina Maslach has done a lot of research in the in the area. And so I think the WHO in 2019, they identified the mass life burnout inventory as sort of the gold standard in doing some of this work, because a lot of organizations are realizing that burnout is real, right? My podcast, The Pulse of Healthcare, is centered around burnout in healthcare, because my worry is that I have a bunch of burnt out colleagues on these front lines right now with very hard conditions. And if we don't strengthen their ability and access and need and support of seeking mental health and emotional health, I think bad things will happen. The physician suicide rate is the highest of any profession. Majority of, as far as sex-wise, there are more females that kill themselves, which is which is a very interesting dynamic. So, I am pushing for advocacy. I think every group is important, but I think that you have to look at personal drivers as far as, what makes that person. There's no one diagnosis that blankets every person. I don't think that in medicine, and I don't think that in the mind. And I also think that the mind is part of medicine, because, it's what controls everything else. So I think we as a community, as a society, we really need to normalize it, just like we talk about cancer or diabetes or coronavirus. Like, it has to be normalized. And I know that with the pandemic and everybody feeling very isolated, and there are a lot of good things that could come from, having shelter at home and other things like that. But there is the worry of all the socioeconomic things that come. Do I have a job? No. Will unemployment last forever? No. Is this virus end in sight? No. So for me, I feel like the whole world has gotten a diagnosis of like a terminal illness. You have absolutely no control.
That was from the episode called The Mental Side of Cancer. On a lighter note, next I interview a bloke called Darren in the episode. Darren JM, DJM Talks.
Now, how are you handling the pandemic? Is it bad in Wales? I don't know what the...
I'm pretty okay with it. Like, I'm not, it sucks.
Yeah, it really does.
Obviously, you can't go anywhere, in a sense, or too far.
Is everything closed, like the bars and all that?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, some supermarkets are open for obvious reasons.
Right.
But other than that, I got 2 bars around me, pretty much closed. I actually saw one of the people who work there today for the first time in ages, but I don't go there, so I don't really socialize with anyone in there, so that don't bother me. My family live pretty close. They live literally just around the corner in a way, so it's not really. I'm not really bothered about that.
Okay.
I can see them because they live around the corner.
Do they require that you wear? I'm sorry, that you wear masks when you go out?
I don't know.
No,
I'm not against it. Like, you want to wear it.
Yeah.
I'm not against anyone wearing gloves or.
But it's not a mandatory thing. They didn't.
Yeah.
The government didn't
apparently
say.
Some places are, but over here apparently it's not. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's optional here too. We actually have a battle because Donald Trump, right?
Sure.
He's not wearing a mask, so his followers are not wearing a mask, which is causing a mess.
Returning with more ways to worry less more is Gigi Langer.
So now I heard that you prepared 5 more ways of worrying less. I'd love to go over them if you'd like.
Great. Well, the first one I picked, we talked about before, but it's so central to getting better because we cannot do it alone. And even though I said that last time, I thought it was useful to think about the kinds of people we hang around and even what we watch on TV and listen to in terms of what kinds of thoughts they're feeding us with. So if I'm hanging around with buddies who are complaining all the time, or if I have a friend where I share a concern I have and they just, well, they might be a bad listener in one of a few ways. One might be, you know, those people you tell you're concerned about, and they come back and just tell a story about themselves, and they're really not interested in your story. They're just interested in telling their story.
Right.
So we need to be really mindful of choosing the people that we partner with as we are making ourselves vulnerable and trying to get better.
Right.
It doesn't mean you never hang out with those negative friends, but they shouldn't be the first choice, you know. And there are those friends who you tell the problem and then they jump on it and awfulize it with you and raise your anxiety rather than helping you access something within yourself that might help you gain a perspective on it.
I call that safe people, being safe.
Yes.
That's what I use, yeah.
Yeah, it's we just can't do it sitting in the lotus position on top of a mountain. We need to have like-minded people who are interested in growing through their own negative patterns and are willing to share how they did it. And lacking that, I think a therapist or a counselor is also an excellent choice just for the very first step. I mean, that's what I did because I was, you know, all my friends I got high with and got drunk with. So, and I was in total denial about how unhappy I was inside. So when I first got sober, I didn't have anybody to hang out with that was healthy. And thank God I had a therapist to kind of help me through the transition. That moment in the no man's land when you're trying not to hang out with the friends that support you in your negativity and damaging lifestyle, and finding new people who are healthy and growing and have grown through some of the negative patterns you have, that's kind of a very vulnerable spot in between the two, because I was not a person who liked groups at all unless I was high. And so, you know, finding a group, it's really important to find a group that has a good sense of confidentiality, has some guidelines for how the group is run so that nobody gets damaged. And that's one of the reasons why I don't say Alcoholics Anonymous is the only group or those 12-step groups, but one of the reasons they're successful is because they have a long track record of keeping the confidentiality, having a good, clean structure, getting people together who can help one another, but leaving it up to those individuals. So, you know, don't try to be an island and do it by yourself. That's the first recommendation.
Okay, we'll put that down as number 6. Yeah, that's good.
And finding healthy people. I call them in the book growth partners. And it's,
okay.
You know, once you kind of send out into the universe that you're wanting to grow in a new healthy direction, and you start doing things that are kind of uncomfortable, like going to a counselor or going to a group, quite interestingly, the universe kind of pitches in and starts, you know, the right people start showing up in our lives. It sounds woo-woo, but it's pretty much how it works. The second one for today's session is what I'm calling, you know, what is called self-compassion. And I think one reason I didn't admit to myself the problems I had was because I was already beating myself up for having those problems, you know, the promiscuity and the drinking and the drugs. And so I would beat myself up rather than And this is not the same as self-pity, which is, oh, poor me, poor me. This is when we wake up to some extent and begin hanging with healthy people and thinking new thoughts and getting honest with ourselves, we start realizing, oh my gosh, I really drove myself into the ground. And in self-compassion and so much of this healing, it's like there's this healthy self that has not been driving the bus because the less healthy self has been driving the bus. But this healthy self has always been there. I call it a loving power, and that healthy self is able to act like a big sister or big brother who might say, "Oh, you poor dear," and talk to me as if in a comforting way. Oh gosh, don't kick yourself. Look what you've been through, and look what's been happening. And sure, you brought it on, a lot of it yourself, but also you have a genetic component with your parents. And so you are not a horrible person. This is how I talk to myself. You're a person trying to get well. And it's a very different way of the old perfectionistic thinking that I had, which was, I have to do everything perfectly or I won't be loved. And you remember I talk about whispered lies, these whispered lies that our fear self tells us. And the antidote, one of them to that whispered lie that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love, is the self-compassion, where we start being able to speak to ourselves in a loving way. And I think one of the best sources of information about that is Kristen Neff. I'll send you the link to that because she has some lovely
thank you.
meditations and a wonderful book called Self-Compassion.
Okay. That sounds good.
And I think, letting go of old habits is very hard because we have to get honest and we have to look at them. And it's nice to learn to have a gentle voice with ourselves that says, yeah, it's not easy, but we're doing it because we don't want to go back to how we were before. So that's self-compassion.
In the episode There's Nothing Wrong With You, Mia's story, Mia talks about how hard it is to get help with mental issues in the Philippines.
Were you able to see a counselor or take any medication for this?
Well, nothing at all, because here in the Philippines, we don't recognize depression as an illness or as a disease that you cure. So psychologists and psychiatrists or shrinks aren't that readily available here in the Philippines, especially like me when I'm in the middle class level in the society. So I don't have access to those kinds of help.
So there's a working class, a middle class, and an upper class?
Yeah, I mean, the working class, middle class. And so the upper class, they definitely have access to it because it's a bit expensive here. So us in the middle class or in the working class doesn't have that help available, or we don't have the budget.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because this podcast is based on healing mental health in different forms, one of which is medication. I think that's necessary for some of the depressions that we have. The other thing I wanted to get into was if you had any ancestry with mental illness. I don't know if they were diagnosed or not, like your parents or your grandparents, aunts or uncles. Was there anyone you could think of?
I think my dad has, but he is a retired colonel from the army. So I don't think he admits that he has or he's going through it.
So he shows signs of depression?
Yes, definitely. He's very angry. He's a very angry person. And
so he yells a lot?
Yes. And the biggest sign that I saw is that he has really bad insomnia.
Next, I had a great conversation with Mr. Blake Johnson. I interviewed Blake on 5/28, only 3 days after the George Floyd incident. George Perry Floyd Jr. was an African-American man who was murdered by a white police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. During an arrest made after a store clerk suspected Floyd might have used a counterfeit $20 bill. So, we discuss our feelings about the incident. Blake is a very interesting and articulate man. He was a fellow podcaster at the time. The name of the episode was Why It Matters.
I think we're going to start out talking about the elephant in the room, which is the George Floyd incident that happened a couple of days ago. Let me apologize to the entire people that are not like me. I found it very disgusting and unbelievable that a person can do such a thing. It's just, to me, it's just unthinkable. And I'm sure for you, it's much, much worse as far as getting upset by it. What are your feelings on the incident, if you want to share it?
It's my feelings on the incident are still, they're not necessarily set in stone. They're right. I felt anger. I felt sadness. I felt frustration. I felt hopeless. I felt, I could probably go on and really sit down and think about a lot of emotions that I felt, but it's really been like a really emotional, chaotic roller coaster of emotions. And for myself, this isn't something that's new, because this has been happening for as long as I've been alive, for throughout the majority of the history of the world as it exists today, or as it always has been. So, yeah, my feelings towards, just the whole incident and everything that's happening is just, it's very difficult to process, yet I'm still trying to understand, trying to figure out what to do, what to say, how to react, what is the proper response. You know what I'm saying? I made a couple of posts already about how I've really been feeling and some of the thoughts and things that it makes me think about and the things I think about doing. It's a really it's just a fucked up world we live in, to be honest. And
they're just not people in my mind.
I think I think that to really address what's happening is like we have to really get to the root cause of what this world is. And I think that if we really want to look at it from a national standpoint and kind of not, it's difficult to do that and not have a global perspective on everything that's happening right now in this moment. We're in the middle of a pandemic. The economy is really messed up, and for Black people in this country, we have been systemically oppressed, and it's been strategically designed for us to live in the conditions and to experience the things that we're experiencing. So when we see George Floyd and the things that have recently happened, it's not, for me, it's not like this is an unfamiliar feeling. It's just like a wound that I consistently have to live with, a wound that sometimes I think starts to heal, but it's consistently being ripped open over and over and over and over again. So this wound that I have to live with, that I have to carry with me every day, it's never fully all the way together. And each time it's like viciously ripped open with incidents like this, you don't know what to do because you're just in excruciating pain. And it's hard to, put it into words and to really speak on it. But for me, I'm really pushing past my own feelings and thoughts and emotions and really working to use my voice to talk about difficult topics like this, and even talk about like mental health and how this impacts people and makes them, think about doing things that will impact and just make things much worse. Yeah, it's a lot.
we're about, 170, 180 years from slavery. So, it's still brewing. I mean, it's still passed on. These people grow up and they're taught to hate. And it's just a terrible thing.
I think first of all, as you're white, correct?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I just went to be sure. So, like, for you as a white man in this country to be willing to have a conversation with me, a black man, and ask my thoughts and my feelings and be willing to listen, I think that's one of the first steps in really bridging this gap and really unpacking this racial divide that we have in this country. I think also when we think about, how we can go back, 118 years to slavery, I think something else that we must also, as we begin to unpack and have these conversations, is to understand that the institution of slavery existed for thousands of years throughout the history of this world, and it has evolved tremendously throughout its existence. And when we have these conversations, we have to understand that we're 118 years from slavery, but that's like, in comparison to where we are today, there's more history with slavery than there is without. So, and so we live in a very unique time and space, and era, with social media and technology. And I know that for myself, as I continue to grow and evolve in the podcast world and become more comfortable and more knowledgeable about speaking on topics like this, it is going to be important that white people are a part of these conversations and they're able to understand that my experiences in this world, in this life, is different than yours. And white people need to begin to challenge their own whiteness that exists, and they have to begin to challenge their family members, and they have to begin to be an advocate for all people as well. But be specific when you say black people. Because our struggle is different. And that's just like, for example, the struggle for women. When women speak up and they use their voice and talk about their issues, that's not my time and space to try to tell women or to try to talk about my issues as a black man or as a man. That's my time to be supportive to women. For example, when a black woman speaks and she talks about her struggles, I'm going to support her and understand her and try to learn more about what it is that she's going through in her experience so I can support her and uplift her.
My next guest, Vivian Conan, was wrongly diagnosed with schizophrenia in her 20s and treated in the hospital. In this episode, she talks about her book called Losing the Atmosphere and her two mental conditions she had. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly called multiple personality disorder. Attachment disorder caused the atmosphere. It's a fascinating story of recovery that I hope it helps others with these disorders.
I just finished, actually, it took me 25 years to write, and I am not the same person at the end of the 25 years that I was in the beginning, both as a writer and also emotionally and psychologically. So I had to go back and smooth it out and make it all. But my book is called Losing the Atmosphere. And the atmosphere was a fantasy world that I created. I didn't create it on purpose, but it just came into being when I was about 5 years old. Multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder, is basically caused by childhood trauma. And the trauma could be physical or sexual or emotional. And in my case, it was mostly emotional trauma and also attachment trauma. And in my fantasy world of the atmosphere, there were all these kindly adults that understood me in a way the real adults in my life did not understand me. And they watched over me, and I thought that they knew everything that I thought and felt and did. And so whenever the real world grown-ups in my life were either abusive or not very kind to me or upsetting to me, I reverted to the atmosphere. And so I was able to get comfort from the atmosphere. And in that way, I was able to go to school and play with children and appear as if my life was normal. So the atmosphere was adaptive for me when I was a child because it helped me get along. And a child cannot escape her situation. Usually she can't leave home. A 5-year-old can't leave home and get along on her own. So I escaped internally instead of escaping externally. But when I grew up and became an adult and was no longer in an abusive situation, I no longer needed the atmosphere, but it was so much a part of my being. And I was so used to getting emotional support from imaginary people, not real people, that it turned from being adaptive to becoming a liability.
In the book, you describe Wendy and Emily. So you also had childlike figures in the atmosphere?
Well, the atmosphere was adults who were kind to me, but I had two what's called disorders. I don't like the word disorder. Conditions, or I call them adaptations. But I had two. One was the atmosphere, which was related to attachment, and the other was I had dissociation, or I split into parts, and that was the dissociative identity disorder, formerly called multiple personality disorder. So what basically happens when a child is abused repeatedly over a long period of time, and by adults on whom the child has to depend for food and shelter, the child cannot escape those people. So another way of escaping internally is by dividing myself up. So what the theory of dissociation is that it's a walling off of parts of yourself to avoid pain. And an example is disaster victims who, if they stare blankly while they go about doing whatever needs to be done in the moment in order to survive, they cut off their emotion, and their emotion only comes back later when it's safe and they can process everything that they went through. So the splitting off of emotion can last for hours. It could last for days, or in my case, it lasted for decades. And so I split off, and I had some child parts that were 6 years old, and I had a part named Emily who was perpetually in search of a mommy, and she was very shy and timid. And then I had another 6-year-old who was very outgoing and precocious, and she was not afraid to talk to adults. And I had other internal parts too. Like I had some internal parts that were helpers. Like I had a part called Almost Vivian, who was about 20 years old and made sure that things functioned right in the outside world, make sure that I got up in the morning to go to work and went to the supermarket to buy food, sort of like an administrator type. So concurrently with the attachment problem, which was the atmosphere, I also had a dissociation problem. And also, you could also go to my website to learn about this. It's VivianConan.com. VivianConan.com.
Okay. We got that. Also, I'll put that on my link in the description so they can just link right to it.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you would want to talk to the audience that we haven't discussed?
Yes, actually. So some people ask me why I wrote the book and what I hope people will take away from reading it. What I really wrote the book primarily because I felt so invisible in the world and so misunderstood. Like a lot of people are afraid when at the time when it was called multiple personality disorder, people thought that people who had multiple personality disorder were freaks and were dangerous. There's a lot in the media like that, someone committed a murder and has multiple personalities, and he said, oh, well, I didn't do it. It was one of my other personalities who did it. And I really want people to see that people who have dissociative identity disorder are just regular people who have been traumatized when they were young, but they go to work, they go to school. You could be next to me in the supermarket and you wouldn't even know it. And also, they're people who have had a lot of pain in their life and they still have pain, and they're troubled people, and that therapy can help with the right therapist, that you can get better, and that this is just another, psychological, emotional condition. It's not a freak. And I would like people also to know, if people, know someone who has dissociative identity disorder, or if people have it themselves, that you can get better from it. It's not quick. You don't get better on an insurance company schedule. Like, it doesn't mean, oh, you have 6 sessions and you take this pill and now you're better. It's a lot of hard work, but you do get better, and don't give up. That's really what the message that I want to put out there.
Carly Israel coaches divorced parents on how they should behave to minimize the impact on their children. She also counsels couples thinking about divorce and what it might be like post-divorce, especially on how it might affect their children. She was raised in a house where both parents were alcoholics, suffered with early depression, and as a child of 9 wanted to die. She started to drink at an early age to try to silence the voices in her head. Listen to her story of recovery and exactly what she does to help children of divorce through a company called In Your Corner. She also wrote her memoirs in a book called Seconds and Inches. The episode is called I Almost Killed the Wrong Person, the Carly Israel story.
I grew up in an alcoholic home, and my parents are sober today, but when I was about the age of 9, I knew I wanted to no longer be alive, which is so sad to me because I have 3 boys and I can't even fathom them feeling like that. But I grew up in that home, and if you grew up in an alcoholic home, what you know is that your outsides had to look good, so no one bothered you about your insides, and that you were told that everything needed to be kept a secret. And so by the age of 9, I had that inner turmoil of, I don't want to be here anymore. And fast forward, I found alcohol and drugs around 12, 13, and I found my solution. It was never my problem because it quieted those voices. It made the discomfort softer, and I found freedom for myself. And then fast forward a little bit more, I'm in college at a party school. I'm in theater doing my thing. I'm getting amazing grades because I have to keep my outside looking good. And I'm seeking out psychiatric help because the depression and the darkness came in. I always talk about it like a boomerang that out of nowhere just turned around and changed the rules. Where once the alcohol and drugs were making everything better, it was like it got reprogrammed in the computer of whatever they were supposed to be doing for me, and it amplified all of the pain and the darkness and the voices. And so anything I put in my body to try to make the pain go away ended up getting louder and more intense. And so I started seeking out help, and I was like, I need help, but I didn't want help for not putting drugs and alcohol in my body because that was my solution. So I wanted someone to give me the right medicine. And I was like, I need the right medication. My parents were sober at this point, and they were telling me that I probably needed to come into the rooms to get sober, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And so I went on the journey of seeing psychiatrist after psychiatrist after psychiatrist. And while there are some really good ones out there, there's also a lot of, I'm sure you know, ones that don't listen to you, right? Scribble on their pads. Started giving me medications to fix the symptoms I was having from the medications I was on instead of finding out what was going on. right? Yeah. By the time I found the right medication, I'd already been on 16 different medications when I was 20. Many diagnoses, many promises that I'd be locked up. I even called one weekend when I couldn't stop the noise and nothing made it go away to lock myself up. But at that time, nobody answered the phone. And so I ended up in the rooms of recovery, and I put nothing in my body because they told me I was supposed to be sober. And 6 days in, I said to myself, if this is what it's supposed to feel like to not have anything in your body and to get better, then you can have it. And without any alcohol or drugs in my body, the voices were so loud and insistent in my brain that I told myself and believed, I know you can understand this. And it's actually a gift because when I work with people today who have been suicidal, I can help them not feel crazy that they're feeling suicidal. I can help them understand that I get it. And what I believed at that time was that it really was in the best interest of everyone around me, including myself, for me to no longer be here. And I believe that even though it would cause pain for my family, that eventually they'd be better off because of all the emotional drama I was causing all the time. For me, I'm sure you can relate to that too. I couldn't see any other way out, so I didn't know that was a false belief. And I ran in the bathroom. I had thought about suicide many times before I got sober. And this was 6 days without anything in my body or brain. And I ran in the bathroom and like an animal, I rummaged through our medicine cabinet and I swallowed 90 pills and laid on the floor and waited to die.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was 19 years old, January 26, 1999. And this is, I don't know when this is going to be released, but this is the month of January 21 for me right now. And so we're good, right. We're scooting up on that time frame. And I almost killed the wrong person. And luckily, I know today that there was a different plan. And luckily, I did not get what I really thought I wanted. And I ended up in the hospital with my stomach pumped and 2 bottles of charcoal and lost all my rights as a human and paramedics and police and find myself out against medical advice. And for me, my real gift of desperation was the long walk home in the snow, 1.5 miles to my apartment, without a plan. People hurt people. And, I have it too in my family. I mean, my family is riddled with alcoholism and depression. And we get to stop and change and break the cycle. And right now, I'm in recovery. My mom and dad are in recovery, and my grandmother, who's 86, is in recovery. So like all 3 generations. So, and we get it, and that's what I'm so excited about. My memoir, which I want to send to you, it's called Seconds and Inches, and it's about generational trauma and the stories we carry, and how we carry stories of generational pain that we've never even met some of the people whose stories we're carrying. Very exciting stuff. I'm so grateful I found you, or you found me. We found each other.
Yeah. That's what I do. I seek out people that can describe how they recovered.
Yeah. And it's a daily,
give people hope.
Daily, right? It's daily. I truly believe that, and I use the word God just because it's an easier word for me. It's not a religious term for me. It's like a spiritual term. I use universe, power, but
I'm the same way.
Yeah, I call it God. And for me, God had a different plan. I actually said, it's like I turned in my chips and I said, I'm done. I want out. This is what I want. And God said, I've got a different plan for you. And so for me, when I remember, which I forget all the time, this is my bonus life. And I personally think I have 2 things I'm supposed to do here on this earth. And one of them is to bring light where there's darkness. And the other one is to give people permission to be who they are, like unapologetically, with the scars and the darkness and all of it. Right. Because we only get to do this once, right? And I want to do it in a way that I can breathe and I can feel proud of the way I'm living.
Next, Bob talks about his background with mental illness. He discusses some of the methods he uses to cope with his many mental issues in the hopes that there is someone out there he could help. Bob has been battling his demons for over 50 years and has some techniques you can use with yours.
As a child, I kept to myself I really didn't like talking to anyone in authority. I always had a hard time talking because I forget words, I slur words. I later came to discover that it's a condition called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Some people call it ADD. I don't think it's a requirement to be hyperactive, but I found this condition as a big hindrance when I talk in a group or to an authority figure when I was young. For all the ADHD people out there, I don't know what symptoms you have. I know mine are bad. Just keep on trying to accept it and don't think of it as a handicap. Think of it as a gift, because you're able to see things that other people cannot. There are medicines for it, like Ritalin, so you may have success with that. I did not. I tried different medicines, and I couldn't tolerate them. They made me nervous, and I have anxiety issue, so it aggravated that. So this is the first demon that I have to overcome and get a hold of. I don't think I am 100%, but I'm much better than I used to be. The second one developed in second grade. I got something called dyslexia. And what it is that you kind of scramble words, and coming from your head to the paper, it just turns out differently. I do a lot of texting with my children, and I'm always making grammar mistakes in the text. Spell check is something that is a lifesaver for me, because I cannot spell worth a darn. So between the two, I have pretty bad communication problems, and I try to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, but it kind of makes me feel different than other people. Now, you might think that was enough, but I think some issues come from the family. And although I had a loving family, they had a tendency, all the males, to be somewhat bullying. I had a brother who was a year older than me, one that was 11 years older, and my father. I also had a sister who I think should be a saint. She is one of the nicest persons, if not the nicest person I ever met. But getting back to my brothers, I had one that was a year older, and he was perfect. I mean, he was the opposite of me. He could communicate. He was dynamic. People listened to him, no matter what he had to say. He was a leader. He played on the high school basketball team that won the New Jersey State Championship. And meanwhile, I was still trying to understand the world and how I fit in. Later on, when I went to work, after I discovered that my memos were just terrible, I made an effort to proofread my memos like at least 10 times. And it was difficult. It was a lot of extra work. Luckily, I worked smart, so I didn't fall behind. But it was very aggravating. And so both of those problems, ADHD and dyslexia, makes it very difficult to do, like I said before, to do the details. But I managed to get that done. In spite of, or maybe because of, my brother that was a year older, and also my other brother and my father. it was a tough environment, and I was not prepared. I was not listened to, and when I did try to talk, they would cut me off. It was a very loud family on all our gatherings. It was just everybody kind of speaking over each other. And I just kind of sat there and didn't really say anything. And I regret that, but I understand it now. And I don't blame my brothers. It was a environment where I guess we were competing for our parents' love, and it made it very difficult, especially when my mother would tell me I was her favorite in front of my brother. So, in spite of it all, my childhood was pretty good. I was pretty happy in my own little world, not knowing of the perfect storm that was coming. I had finished grammar school and was going to junior high in 7th grade when my father decided he'd take a job in Alabama because it was more money and it was a manager's position. My mother agreed to go under one condition. After a year, we don't like it, we can move back. So we rented out our house for a year. So I was still 11, my brother was 12, and we had to go with them to Alabama, from New Jersey to Alabama. The culture shock was, oh my God. And I'm not saying nothing bad about Alabama, but we just were not used to it, and we pretty much hated it for the year that we were there. But to the day, my mother called after 1 year, the truck to move us out, go back to the house that we had rented out. And that was it, the end of Alabama. But unfortunately, I developed OCD there. I guess because I was going through adolescence. I don't really know why I got the OCD, but it was pretty bad. I had all sorts of rituals, hand washing, religious rituals where I had to do something or else something bad would happen. That's pretty much what OCD is. Later on when I was working, we used to watch this guy who'd take his car and park it far away from everybody, and it had to be just right. Come in about 6 or 7 times. Get out of the car, check all his tires, check the front, the back, everything. And a couple times he would walk away and take about 4 or 5 steps, and boom, he was back. He turned around, went back, checked everything again. It's not funny. It's a pretty bad problem for a lot of people. I know there is some medicines that are supposed to make it a little easier, and also there's therapy. I kind of control it myself, even though it's strong sometimes. I think I do a pretty good job. One last thing I want to say about my family was, back then, mental illness was really not talked about. My suspicion was that my father had bipolar. Now, especially now that I look back on it. And my mother had extreme anxiety. So I think a large part of that I inherited. So there you have it. ADHD, OCD, and dyslexia. And a family that didn't understand mental illness. So I had a lot of things against me, but I went to college. I learned computers. I was always good at math. And I got a job as an IT developer. Well, the work didn't agree with me. I do have a good side of my personality where I really am almost extroverted. So I was able to make friends at work, but the politics were unbelievable until the day I left. I just was glad I got to leave and retire and dedicate myself to this podcast. But that wasn't all of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't all of it. I got married. Yes, married. My friends sat me down in the living room and they said, "We have this blind date set up for you and you can't pussy out on us." And I'm like, "Blind date? What? Are you crazy?" I'm going on a blind date. Well, after an hour, I wound up going on the date, and it turned out to be my wife. We probably didn't have that much in common other than we were both insecure. I think we looked upon each other to make each other more secure. But I fell in love, and I don't know what she fell in, but it didn't last. Well, I mean, it lasted for 13 years. And then the dynamics changed because I was getting better and better in recovery. And I'm getting ahead of myself. But the last two really bad things I have to deal with is extreme anxiety and major depression.
Find out more in the episode Perfect Storm, Fighting Demons. The next episode is ADHD Validation. Join Vivian Tan and I as we discuss ADHD, bubble tea, and anxiety and depression that I believe is a manifestation of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, specifically inattentive. I believe many people suffer quietly and anonymously with this surprising self-esteem stealer. Also, since you are not able to pay attention as well as the next, modern society finds this unacceptable. ADHD, I believe, is a distant cousin of autism.
Other things, like couldn't really focus on things, and I was like, even though people said, I have so much potential, right? Like, I was still kind of bad studying. Wasn't really good at listening, and it also put a toll on my social life as well, kind of with trying to make friends, because it ended up with me not clicking, and because I'm trying to pay attention, but like they just think I'm rude because I don't know when to focus.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly what I always say. I don't know when to start talking and when not to. It's amazing that you were able to do, or you're able to do the things that you do, because I just went into IT, which was mostly not that much talking. Later on, it got more, but I'm very interested in how you handle your ADHD. And do you have any kind of like a performance anxiety type of issue with it, or?
Yeah, I would say, with kind of ADHD, along with it came anxiety and depression.
Right.
Kind of as a result, because I tend to overthink a lot.
Right.
When your mind goes on all the time, you start to suddenly think so much. Sometimes it's good, it has its strengths, but other times it causes you to worry a lot more. And also that caused me to be very insecure about myself in the past, because, I thought that everyone hated me. I think I wasn't good enough.
Right.
And, I'll never be able to succeed. Like, I always have to be defined by others. But
well, we're just like twins almost. I know exactly where you're coming from.
But I guess with speaking, because like usually with stage fright, I still have stage fright. I'm being really honest. I still have stage fright, but what really drives me is kind of what I like about public speaking and, just helping others and kind of sharing stories. Because I do like kind of, sharing advice and kind of sharing a story to help others as well, by giving resources and giving advice.
Right.
Because not only you're, building yourself up, but you're also building other people up.
Right.
And I would say with that was also kind of the main reason why I decided to start getting involved by volunteering in the community. I kind of went into mini hyper-focus aspect of, really getting involved, really, pushing myself like beyond. And yeah, I would say I wouldn't have become the person I am today, like without my ADHD.
Yeah.
Like at first I thought, like ADHD is all bad, right? Because, a lot of people tend to think sometimes, having a mental disorder is always bad.
Right.
Like the ADHD with autism and such.
You also have, by any chance, I'm sorry, Steve, I'm interrupting. Do you have any kind of form of dyslexia?
No, I don't.
See, I have that too, and so the combination is deadly. Again.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. But I would say, like, I don't know how to say, but there can be their strengths, like with personality aspects wise, like, and also kind of hyper focus, I would say, for ADHD.
Yeah.
Like, even though we can have trouble controlling when we focus, it's not that we can't focus at all. It's just, having trouble knowing when to focus.
We focus on what our brain tells us to focus on at that time. And I do a lot of hyper focusing, especially when I used to program. But what happens is the 7 hours will be like 7 minutes. Yeah, it's a weird time thing that when I hyper focus, time just goes by like crazy. So I don't know if you experienced that.
I also experienced that too. It's like, hey, it's dinner time already. Like a few minutes went by so fast. And other times it's like, why can't I get into, the zone? And, once you finally can get into the zone, that's when you get interrupted and it can get really frustrating.
Right.
But see, sometimes hyperfocus can be something magical, especially when you're passionate about something. That's when you could really go into and dive into what you're really good at, what you really love, and you really thrive in it. But yeah, I just want to also put that out there. Just make sure to also set some alarms to take some breaks.
Yeah.
Because it can be really hard for you internally to kind of say, hey, it's time to go drink water or it's time to go eat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do exactly that. I forget to eat and it's just, I found it to be a nuisance, and it gets a little bit worse, I think, with age. I'm 62, and I find it being a little bit worse as far as trying to pay attention to people and things. But I experienced the same thing. I had some friends who were just friends, but they did a lot of picking on me because I would make stupid mistakes, and so they would pick on me. And then growing up in a family of 6 loud people, I never got a word in edgewise, and I developed some kind of speaking disorder in a sense, because I'm always afraid that somebody's going to interrupt me, because that's what they used to do. I would say something and I didn't have the colorful words or whatever, I don't know, but they would just cut me right off. So I experienced a lot of situations where I got cut off while I was trying to say something, and that just sort of, like a dog that's been beat too much, that kind of just got to me and affected my self-esteem. And I never really figured it out until now. I always thought that I was just kind of just a weirdo. And I couldn't figure out why. And
now I think I have it pretty much all figured out. And I think the ADHD is so underrated as a problem. I think it's a much bigger problem than it gets, than it, like, if I talk to a lot of people, they'll all tell me they had ADD when they were younger. Almost everybody that I mention it to. And that kind of, to me, that kind of just, makes it a little bit, okay, it's not a big deal, but it's a very big deal, I think. But you found a positive way to express it, which is great.
Thank you. And I also want to say to you that, like, I want to say that I'm really glad that you found, the reason kind of why. And I also want to say I can totally understand how bad it can feel that if, someone's going to cut you off, right? You're not going to be heard or no one really listens to you. And yeah, it really sucks because it feels like, you're kind of trapped in this bubble.
I feel invisible. I'm a very tall person. I'm 6'7", but it's like I can just disappear sometimes because people aren't paying attention to me. Like if I'm at a bar with somebody else, let's say, and a third person comes in, I'm kind of out of the conversation at that point. So I experience, like, if there's 3 people, I always get left out. If there's more than a one-on-one, I feel I get left out a lot because I don't know when to talk and somebody else will get in before me all the time.
Next, come join Kyle Mitchell, otherwise known as Social Anxiety Kyle. This is a fascinating story about his amazing recovery from severe social anxiety. Kyle takes you through his very shy attitude when he was put in a new school that was much bigger than his last. He takes you through the steps he went through to beat his social anxiety and become socially confident.
So how did you feel exactly? I mean, did you just get really tense, or did you feel like you had to leave the room? Or what was your feeling like when you were like that?
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of physical symptoms. Honestly, I would feel my body just get extremely hot. I mean, how I always describe it feels like a heat wave. Like it would just rise up my body really fast, and I would feel extremely hot. My hands would get very sweaty, like the palms of my hands. My heart would race. I had that a lot. That was like the main things, and the intrusive thoughts and the anxious thoughts, thinking that people around me were judging me constantly for just every little thing possible, anything from how I was talking to how I was walking to class. I felt like people were, judging me just based on doing those little, simple things. So that was pretty much what it was like for me.
Right. Yeah. So how would you advise a normal, maybe somebody does have ADHD or just a normal person? Well, not that ADHD is not normal, but how would you advise a person to start to get better? What would you say? You had mentioned go to someone else, talk to someone else. Is there other steps that they can follow?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely step one, no matter what it is go ask for help, go talk to somebody. Just being able to let everything inside that you may be holding in, like I was such a relief for me, even though there was literally like no action steps that I took, but just me simply expressing out loud how I felt to someone else and kind of sharing my burden or letting it off my back, rather, was so helpful for me. And just feeling that release. And as far as like next steps for if you're talking about like social anxiety, I kind of have like a 3-step process on what I use. or what I did use and still use, honestly, to help with social anxiety. Number one was and is shower yourself with self-love. And how I do that.
That's a good one.
Is I advise people to go stand in the mirror every single morning, look yourself in the face, and speak positive self-affirmations to yourself. You know, that, I mean, I'll just list them off that I do on a daily basis, but you know, I look at myself in the face and I say, I love myself. You know, I am confident. I'm socially confident when talking to people. I am a good speaker, and you can kind of customize them based on, you know, exactly what makes you anxious and what you're trying to achieve and that type of thing. But I think that's the step.
Yeah, that's positive affirmation. I understand what you're saying exactly. I don't tend to do that as much as I probably should. But I think it's very helpful. I had told my son that he was having a little problem with school and socializing. And I told him that pretend that on your T-shirt you have something that says, I'm good enough. I'm a good person. And you're just announcing that to the world. And he said that made a big difference. He did that and it made a difference.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I believe it. And props to him for having the courage to wear that. Yeah, I know that would.
Yeah. Oh, no, he didn't actually wear it. I said pretend that it says that. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, the power of your mind and how you think literally controls how you feel. If you can master that part about your mind, if you can master that mindset part, you can literally choose how you feel. That's something that I've been spending the past few years on really trying to get better and better at every single day, because I've just come to realize it. And one example I like to tell people all the time, that the difference between confident people and unconfident people is confident people believe that they're confident. They think they are. They tell themselves that. People who are unconfident, they don't believe it. They tell themselves that they're not confident, therefore they aren't. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah. You don't happen to listen to, I always mention an artist called NF.
Yes, I love NF, yes.
Okay, I love him. I want to marry him. He has a point in one of his songs where he mentioned, you know, just what you're saying is that, you know, you have to look at yourself and say that you're good. But so that's like a second step. Is there other steps that a person could follow? Because one of the things I like to do on this show is to really teach people different techniques on helping themselves. That's why I'm asking them so many questions like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I love you asking questions. But yeah, that's the first step I tell people. The second step is, what I call is find a baby step that you can partake in. What I did was I found little uncomfortable challenges that could challenge the anxiety I felt in certain situations, and do them over and over again until my brain was trained to realize I don't need anxiety in this situation. So, for example, my first ever uncomfortable challenge for me was when I was in college, was to raise my hand one time in every single class and answer or ask a question, because I knew I felt a whole lot of anxiety every time I did this. It made me extremely uncomfortable. But I also knew, like, on the outside, you know, looking at it from the outside, like, there's not really a reason for me to have anxiety in that situation. Like, I'm not in danger. You know, I am in no harm. Literally, my anxiety from that is coming from perceived judgments of other people that are almost more than likely not true, but it's stuff that I'm making up in my head. So that's what I started doing, was I started raising my hand, and I did this over and over and over again, and it was really hard at first. So, I mean, I would kind of like those symptoms that I was telling you earlier, you know, feeling that heat wave and my heart racing. I felt that every single time for a while, and I kept doing it. And after about 6 weeks or so, I had literally trained my brain to realize, like, oh, I don't need to be anxious in this moment. Like, Kyle is safe. He does not need my help with this anxiety right now. And I promise you, after doing that for about 6 weeks or so, I did not feel anxiety raising my hand and asking questions and stuff like that. I was able to do it multiple times, and I felt confident about it. And it was all just because of repetition, and I trained my brain to realize that I did not need anxiety in that moment. Because there are times when we do need anxiety, don't get me wrong, but there are times when we absolutely don't. And I mean, that's pretty much what social anxiety is. It's just having anxiety in times it's not necessary for us to have. I mean, anxiety's purpose is to keep us safe when we're in danger. That's when it comes up. Like if you're going back to like tribal times, like if you come across a lion or something, like you should have anxiety there because you just came across with an actual threat. But the difference that I was facing was I was feeling that anxiety of, quote unquote, seeing a lion, except for it was just for me raising my hand. So I had to train my brain to realize, I'm safe in this moment. Let me show you how. Let me show you why I'm safe. So I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And
that sounds really good. The one thing is with me, I tend to sometimes panic and forget what I'm saying a lot. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah. So, what I was just about to say was this looks different for everybody. So what my first challenge if you're listening, may sound way too difficult or hard to do. And it may seem like just way too easy of a step. Maybe that wouldn't give you anxiety at all. But what I always try to tell people is find something that just gives you just like an ounce of anxiety, something that you just feel just a little bit. That way you can kind of just dip your toe in the anxiety waters. One that I always like to quote is just waving at a stranger when you're at the car. Like if you're driving by people on like a 2-lane road and there's people passing you by, like stick your arm out and wave. I mean, that's just like another example, but do something that's so little with that. But as far as like forgetting what you're saying, like while you're in mid-sentence, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I'm sort of talking about something, and then all of a sudden my mind goes blank because I'm so anxious. And, I have so much anxiety built up. So, well, I try to be calm and tell myself, okay, you'll remember it soon enough. And sometimes that works. Sometimes I just kind of say, well, I lost my place. I'm sorry. So I think that's a good thing to do, is just admit that, you lost your train of thought.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think a lot of that can be, I don't want to say solved, but I think a lot of it is like self-love. I mean, the more that you love yourself, the more you can learn to love yourself, the less you care. The less you care about what other people think, the less you care if you mess up. I say this in just about every podcast I do when I come on. I don't care if I do terrible in this right now. I mean, I could care less if I fumble my words and totally screw up in this podcast, which hopefully I'm doing okay right now. But if I totally mess up, it's okay because I love myself. At the end of the day, I am okay with me. I love myself. It doesn't matter to me. I'm out here to do my best. And that kind of brings me to my next step, which is rewarding your effort over your results. I'm a huge believer in that. I do not, like I said, I do not care about the results. All I care about is my effort. I came on here and I'm doing this podcast. And I'll be honest, I felt a little anxious doing this. Just coming on this podcast. I have my 2-year-old son downstairs watching TV, so I'm kind of like anxious about him coming up here and messing up. But I'm like, whatever. Yeah. I'm just putting in the effort, and the result's the result. I can't control the result, but I know I can control my effort. So that's what I focus on, is the thing I can control, because what's the point of focusing on something you can't control? I'm not going to let that dictate how I feel.
Right. And also, it's an element of facing my fear. I do a lot of that because I have a lot of fear and anxiety. So I always just do it anyway. And I don't know if you ever saw that movie, Jumanji.
Yeah.
With Robin Williams. At the very end, he says, my father always told me that you should face your fears. So I believe in that. I do things, no matter how anxious I remember one time, I do have bad depression as well. I was just recovering from like 6 months of bad depression. And I work in IT, so I had an interview. And I couldn't describe to you how nervous I was, how my body was almost shaking. But I went in and I had the interview. I didn't do well, but I went in and I did it. And I think that's half the battle, if you can go and do it. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that will make you more confident. That happens all the time.
Yeah, 100%. You went out and you made the effort. Once again, like I said, that doesn't really matter. It's just I don't know how it went. I mean, as long as you went out and did the effort. That's why I said reward your effort, not your result. When I do these little social challenges that I do, I always put a reward-based system in it. So I have something that's kind of like an extra incentive for myself for completing the challenge. So like when I did that one with raising my hand, my reward was, okay, when I get home from school, I'm going to do an hour of playing Xbox before I start on my homework. Because, back then I like to play video games, but I was also an extremely disciplined person. I always finished all my work before I did any sort of play. So that was like an extra incentive for me. It was like, okay, if I just do this, if I can do this, I can, I'll go and, do an hour of Xbox before I start on my homework. And it's helpful, not only as like an incentive, but just as to reinforce, like, doesn't matter about the result. It's about the effort. And like, just to tell yourself, like, good job, Kyle. Like, you went out and you did that. You raised your hand when you didn't want to. Like, you did that out of your own will. Like, that's incredible. Like, awesome on you for doing that. And so it's just a little physical thing you can give yourself.
That concludes part 2 of our look back of the best of OTR Achieving Mental Health for Real through its 5 years and 100 episodes. I would like to thank all the people who had the courage to talk about their struggles or give advice and help people who are struggling with their own mental health issues. So, if you want to hear more of these episodes, they are all out there on your favorite podcast listening site. I hope that something resonated with you as you travel on your own spiritual journey. I hope you discovered how you can help yourself with the help of others to lessen the pain of your mental issues, to enable you to fight for your mental health.